of the sharks, being attracted by the lure of this silver, came out of the water and bit the cage in the boat and took the cage out of the boat. And the guy suddenly was no longer there. The midget was gone. They couldn't find him. He had locked himself into the head of the ship and wouldn't come out.
They say the scariest monsters are the ones you never actually see. And for nearly 50 years, Jaws has terrified audiences with that very idea. But what most fans always believed to be Steven Spielberg's genius was actually born out of disaster. And now, decades later, Spielberg revealed the hidden truth behind the movie's iconic terror, and it's not what anyone expected. A surprising success. When Jaws was being made, very few people at Universal thought it would work. To the studio heads, it was just a little movie about a shark.
What was a blockbuster for Hollywood, but a disaster for sharks.
Nothing more. They didn't see it as groundbreaking or even as a film that would draw crowds. In fact, they doubted it so much that the movie almost fell apart.
See, Jeremy, man, he's gonna have a heart attack when he sees what I brought him.
Before it even reached theaters. First, there was the budget. The film was supposed to cost around $3.5 million, but delays and disasters quickly doubled that number. Every day on set seemed like a new nightmare. The mechanical shark they built barely worked. Scenes had to be reshot. Weather ruined entire days of filming. The production dragged on way past schedule, and Universal was losing patience. Executives began to wonder if this young director named Steven Spielberg,
world-famous, highly celebrated, and critically acclaimed filmmaker Steven Spielberg,
had gotten in way over his head. Plus, there was the story itself. Back in the mid-1970s, the idea of a killer shark movie sounded silly to most people in Hollywood. Some critics laughed at the idea before it even premiered. How could a fake shark terrorizing a beach town scare anyone? The film industry had seen monster movies before, but they were usually low-budget B-movies, with rubber creatures that made audiences roll their eyes. Spielberg's movie seemed destined for the same fate. But what happened next shocked everyone. When Jaws hit theaters in June of 1975, audiences went crazy for it. People screamed, jumped out of their seats, and then lined up to see it again. Word spread fast, and within weeks, theaters were packed with fans who couldn't get enough of the thrill. Parents warned their kids about swimming in the ocean. Beaches across America were suddenly emptier because people were genuinely afraid of what might be lurking beneath the waves. The numbers told the real story of just how successful the movie was. Jaws became the highest-grossing film ever at that time, pulling in over $470 million worldwide. It smashed records left and right. No one had ever seen a movie dominate theaters like this before. And the haunting two-note theme by John Williams became one of the most recognizable pieces of music in history, even to this day. And just like that, a movie that wasn't supposed to succeed, that had all the odds against it, did find immense success, bigger than anyone could have ever imagined. Filming nightmares at sea. When people watched Jaws, they were terrified of the shark. But if you asked the cast and crew what really scared them, they'd say one word: the ocean. The real monster wasn't the mechanical shark, it was Mother Nature. From day one, filming on the open water turned into a nightmare. Spielberg wanted the movie to feel real, so instead of shooting in a big water tank like most directors would have done, he insisted on filming in the Atlantic Ocean. It sounded bold, even genius, but nobody realized how much chaos that choice would bring. The ocean didn't care about their schedule. The waves tossed the boats around, cameras tipped, and sound equipment kept shorting out. Imagine setting up the perfect shot, only for a wave to crash over and ruin everything. That happened over and over again. Some days, they'd spend hours waiting for the water to calm, only to get maybe 10 minutes of usable footage. And it wasn't just the water. The boats themselves caused huge problems. There was the Orca, which was the main boat used in the film, plus the other boats carrying all the cameras and crew. But the ocean was wide open, and other real boats kept drifting into the background of shots. Nothing breaks the illusion of a small New England town being terrorized by a shark faster than a fancy yacht cruising by in the distance. Spielberg would lose his mind whenever that happened, because it meant retaking everything. On top of that, filming in the middle of the sea made everyone sick. Crew members got seasick almost every day, some so bad they couldn't work. The set became a mix of nausea, exhaustion, and short tempers. People were fighting, shouting, and even threatening to quit. There were also dangerous close calls. In one scene, the boat starts sinking while the actors are on board. The problem was that during filming, the boat really did start to go under, with cameras rolling. Crew members screamed for safety divers, and Spielberg yelled to keep the actors safe. The cameras nearly drowned too, and since this was before digital, losing that film stock could have killed the whole project. Every day dragged on longer than planned. What was supposed to be a few weeks of shooting stretched into months. The budget shot through the roof, and Universal Studios started to panic. Rumors spread that Spielberg might get fired, and some thought the movie would never be finished. But through all the chaos, the film kept going. Spielberg was only in his 20s, but he refused to give up. He would sit on the deck, staring at the ocean, trying to figure out how to turn disaster into something magical. Nobody on set thought they were making history at the time. They thought they were stuck in a nightmare, one storm away from failure. But little did they know, every struggle at sea was shaping Jaws into the legend it would become. The shark that rarely worked. The shark in the movie was made to be such a scary element. But the funny truth was that the shark barely ever worked on set. The crew gave it a name, Bruce, after Spielberg's lawyer, and that became its nickname throughout production. But Bruce was an absolute nightmare. The plan was for this giant mechanical shark to be the centerpiece of the film, showing up again and again to terrify the audience. Except every time they tried to use it, something broke. The salt water chewed through its wires. The pneumatic hoses leaked. The jaws wouldn't close properly. Sometimes it just sank to the bottom of the ocean like a dead fish. Imagine trying to shoot the scariest shark movie ever made, and the shark refuses to cooperate. That was Spielberg's daily problem. At first, the breakdowns were frustrating. Filming was supposed to last 55 days. Instead, the production dragged on for over 150 days. Each time Bruce failed, the schedule got longer and the budget grew bigger. The crew joked about it constantly, but Spielberg wasn't laughing. He later admitted he would go back to his hotel room each night, convinced the movie would end his career. But things got interesting when Spielberg realized he couldn't rely on Bruce to carry the suspense. So instead of showing the shark right away, he turned to the oldest trick in the book, fear of the unknown. Think about it. For most of the movie, you don't see the shark at all. You just hear that chilling two-note theme from John Williams. You see splashing water. You see swimmers panicking. And that's it. This wasn't Spielberg's original plan, but it turned out to be genius. By hiding the shark, he forced audiences to imagine it. And what you imagine is always scarier than what you actually see. When Bruce finally does appear on screen, the impact is massive because the buildup has been so intense. Spielberg later compared the problem to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. In that film, the stabbing in the shower only lasts seconds, but audiences swear they saw a knife plunging again and again. In reality, Hitchcock never showed the blade striking flesh. The horror came from suggestion, meaning quick cuts, sound effects, and clever editing that made viewers believe they saw more than they actually did. With Jaws, Spielberg used the same idea. The broken shark forced him into creating a new style of suspense, one that worked even better than his original vision. So when the movie finally hit the theaters, audiences were terrified. And the craziest part was that most of those scares happened without Bruce ever showing up on screen. People walked out of the theater afraid to step into the ocean, and all because Spielberg turned a broken prop into the ultimate horror weapon. Sometimes in filmmaking, disasters kill a project, but in this case, the disaster saved it. If Bruce had worked perfectly, Jaws might have been just another monster movie. Instead, it became the kind of thriller that gets under your skin and stays there. Spielberg's fear and self-doubt. Steven Spielberg was only 27 years old when he got the chance to direct Jaws. For Hollywood, that was almost unheard of. Most directors with such a massive project under their belt were older, more experienced, and already proven. Spielberg was still green, and he knew it. The pressure weighed on him every single day. From the very beginning, Spielberg lived with one terrifying thought. What if they fire me? He was the youngest person on set, trying to manage a giant crew, a malfunctioning shark, and a studio that didn't fully believe in the movie. Every time something went wrong, he thought the producers were going to replace him. That fear followed him constantly, like a shadow. People who worked with Spielberg at the time remember how nervous he was. The film's budget was already creeping higher than expected. Shooting days stretched longer than anyone planned. The studio was calling from Los Angeles, frustrated at how much money was being burned. Spielberg, instead of facing those conversations head-on, sometimes hid from them. There are stories of him literally avoiding producers because he didn't want to hear the criticism. He would vanish to the other side of the island or pretend to be too busy on set just to escape their anger. Imagine being 27 and every single day knowing that a phone call from Hollywood could end your dream job in an instant. Spielberg later admitted he felt completely overwhelmed. The movie was much bigger than anything he had done before. The ocean was unpredictable, the crew was tired, and the mechanical shark kept breaking down. On top of all that, he felt like the producers were breathing down his neck. That fear greatly influenced the way he worked. But the thing is, instead of collapsing under the pressure, Spielberg learned how to use his fear. He pushed himself harder and started trusting his instincts more than the rules. Because he couldn't rely on the shark, he leaned into suspense. Because he felt the clock ticking, he made bold choices on the spot. He stopped worrying about what the producers might say and focused instead on what the audience might feel. In a strange way, the constant pressure became his training ground. Spielberg learned that limitations could be a secret weapon. He also learned that sometimes being young and untested meant he was willing to try things older directors might have played safe. By the time Jaws hit theaters, all that fear and self-doubt had turned into something else: confidence. The movie's success gave Spielberg the belief that he could stand toe-to-toe with anyone in Hollywood. But he never forgot how it felt to think he might lose everything. Actor conflicts and behind-the-scenes drama. Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss had one thing in common on the set of Jaws: they couldn't stand each other. What started as a little irritation quickly grew into one of the most famous feuds in movie history. Shaw, who played Quint, was older, rougher, and already known for his drinking. Dreyfuss, much younger and eager to prove himself, often felt the sting of Shaw's sharp tongue. On set, Shaw would take digs at him in front of the crew. Sometimes it was playful, but most of the time it wasn't. But Dreyfuss didn't exactly keep quiet either. He pushed back, and that only made things worse. Stories from the shoot tell of shouting matches, slammed doors, and even times where Dreyfuss would storm off. Spielberg had to step in more than once like a referee trying to keep the peace. Alcohol did nothing but pour fuel on the fire. Shaw was known to drink heavily, and when he did, his temper grew shorter. There's a story that Shaw once dared Dreyfuss to climb a mast, then pulled the ladder away while laughing. Another time, Shaw threw a glass at Dreyfuss during an argument. For a director already stressed by broken sharks and budget worries, this was the last thing Spielberg needed. But the thing is, all that fighting and raw tension somehow made it onto the screen in the best way possible. When you watch Quint and Hooper argue, it doesn't feel like they're acting. You can sense the real frustration. The digs, side-eye glances, and the tone of voice were all authentic. Spielberg even admitted that the feud added a certain electricity to their scenes. Looking back, it's hard not to laugh a little at how wild the set must have been. A young director, an older actor drinking between takes, and a rising star refusing to be pushed around is just the kind of behind-the-scenes drama that could have sunk the film. Instead, it gave Jaws an edge. Spielberg later joked that he sometimes welcomed the tension because it gave him exactly what he needed for the story. Two men trapped on a boat, forced to work together, but constantly clashing. In real life, Shaw and Dreyfuss did not become best friends, but in the film, their uneasy partnership made the danger of the shark feel even more real. The chemistry their constant fight created turned out to be one of the film's greatest accidents. John Williams' game-changing score. When people think about Jaws, most of them instantly hear those two notes in their head. Da-dum, da-dum. It's amazing how something so simple became one of the most famous sounds in movie history. But at first, Steven Spielberg wasn't convinced at all. When composer John Williams sat him down at the piano and played those low, pulsing notes, Spielberg actually laughed. He thought Williams was joking, saying it was too plain and almost childish. Spielberg was expecting something grander, maybe a full melody that matched the scale of his movie. What Williams played sounded almost too simple at first, but when Spielberg questioned it, Williams explained that the simplicity was exactly what made it brilliant. Spielberg decided to give it a chance, and the gamble paid off bigger than anyone could have imagined. Once the shark kept breaking down during filming, Spielberg had to rely more on suggestion than actual visuals. That's where Williams's score became the real shark. Whenever those notes started creeping in, audiences felt the tension rise. They didn't need to see the monster. They could feel it because the music told them everything. It worked so well that the shark could be off-screen for long stretches of time, yet people still sat in the theater clutching their armrests. The audience was trained to respond like Pavlov's dogs. Hear those notes, and you knew something bad was about to happen. And the result was groundbreaking. Music wasn't just background anymore, but became a character. Williams's score gave the unseen shark a voice, turning silence into dread and water into a death trap. Without it, the film would have struggled to build the same level of suspense. In the years since, the Jaws theme has become much more than a movie cue. It's part of pop culture. People hum it while sneaking up on friends in a swimming pool, or filmmakers use it in parodies to signal looming trouble. It's shorthand for fear, and it's recognized across generations. What started as a simple two-note idea turned into one of the most haunting and unforgettable scores in cinema history. Even today, you don't need to see the shark. You just need to hear the music, and suddenly, you're back in the water, looking over your shoulder. The legendary Indianapolis monologue. Every great movie has that one scene that sticks in people's minds long after the credits roll. In Jaws, it was the Indianapolis monologue delivered by Robert Shaw, who played the grizzled shark hunter, Quint. What makes this moment so powerful is not just the words themselves, but the story behind how it came together. Originally, the script had a version of Quint's speech about surviving the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. But it wasn't working. It was either too short, too long, or too flat. Spielberg knew the movie needed something stronger, something that explained why Quint hated sharks so much, and why he was willing to risk his life to hunt one. That's when Robert Shaw stepped in and rewrote the monologue himself. Shaw was not only an actor, but also a playwright. He trimmed down the draft and sharpened the edges of the story, turning it into the haunting, poetic version that made it into the final film. Spielberg later admitted that Shaw's rewrite was a gift because it gave the movie the weight and seriousness it had been missing. The first time Shaw performed the speech, though, it was a disaster. He had been drinking heavily, and the scene came out sloppy and incoherent. Spielberg recalled that night with frustration, thinking they had wasted precious filming time. But Shaw, aware that he had let everyone down, came back the next day and asked for another chance. This time, sober and focused, Shaw delivered the monologue with an intensity that left everyone on set silent. He described, almost in a whisper, the horror of hundreds of sailors thrown into the ocean after the ship sank, the endless waiting in the dark, and the sharks that picked them off one by one. By the time he finished, the crew knew they had witnessed something special. That speech transformed Quint from a grumpy old fisherman into a tragic figure with a haunting past. It gave the audience a reason to fear the shark on a deeper level, not just as a monster, but as a reminder of real-life terror. Spielberg later said that without the Indianapolis monologue, Jaws might have felt like just another thriller. With it, the film gained the gravitas that turned it into a classic. How Jaws changed movies forever. Back in 1975, nobody was ready for the kind of storm Steven Spielberg was about to bring with Jaws. At first glance, it looked like a simple thriller about a killer shark terrorizing a beach town. But what happened next flipped the movie industry upside down. First, there's the matter of how Jaws invented the whole idea of the summer blockbuster. Before then, summer was considered a slow season for Hollywood. Studios used to hold their best films for the fall or winter, when people spent more time indoors. But when Jaws dropped in June, people lined up around the block to see it. The theaters were packed, day after day, all summer long. Suddenly, summer became the season for big releases. Without Jaws, you wouldn't have Star Wars launching in May, or Marvel dropping their biggest hits in July. Now here's another game changer. The way movies were released used to be slow and limited. A film would start in a handful of cities, then slowly expand across the country. But Jaws broke that tradition. Universal rolled it out nationwide, hitting over 400 theaters at once. That wide release strategy became the blueprint. Today, whenever you see a movie hit thousands of screens worldwide on opening weekend, you can thank Jaws for setting that standard. And it wasn't just the release strategy. The movie also rewired how studios thought about marketing. Instead of relying on critics or word of mouth, Universal pumped money into TV ads. They ran trailers everywhere, building hype before the film even came out. This was new at the time. The idea of blitzing the public with ads, posters, and tie-ins started here. After Jaws, studios realized that if you want a hit, you have to sell the event, not just the story. There was also the genius merchandise. Shark toys, t-shirts, beach gear. People couldn't get enough of it. Before Jaws, studios didn't fully understand the power of tie-in products. Spielberg's Shark showed them how big the money could be outside the theater. Of course, that opened the door for sequels too. The success of the movie kicked off 3 more films, and even though the later ones didn't measure up, the concept of a franchise became part of Hollywood's playbook. But the influence didn't stop with the industry. It hit pop culture in wild ways. Beach attendance actually dropped the summer after the blockbuster was released. People were legit scared to swim. Shark phobia skyrocketed. On the flip side, sharks became pop icons. They went from mysterious sea creatures to the ultimate Hollywood villains. Every shark movie since, from Deep Blue Sea to The Meg, owes its life to Jaws. Academics and critics have argued for years about whether Jaws was a blessing or a curse. Some say it made Hollywood too focused on big hits, pushing aside smaller, more thoughtful films. Others argue it proved movies could be both entertaining and groundbreaking. Whatever side you're on, you can't deny its impact. It changed Hollywood, created the modern blockbuster system, and made summer the prime movie season. Almost 50 years later, Jaws still bites. The music, suspense, the legacy are all still there. And the ripple effect is still felt every time you see a studio drop a trailer months ahead of a big release, or when fans flood theaters opening weekend. Spielberg's career transformation. When Steven Spielberg took on Jaws, he wasn't the Hollywood legend we know today. He was a young TV director who had just started dipping his toes into film. In fact, many in the industry thought the studio was taking a gamble by letting him direct such a big project. Nobody knew that this one movie would completely change his life. Before Jaws, Spielberg's work was mostly on television, with episodes of shows like Columbo. He had directed a made-for-TV movie called Duel, which got some attention and showed he had an eye for suspense and pacing. But TV was still TV. Hollywood didn't see him yet as a director who could handle something as massive as a major studio release. That changed with Jaws. The film turned him into an overnight success. The box office numbers were historic, and suddenly, Spielberg was the young face of a new era of directors. He went from a guy fighting for credibility to the person every studio wanted, and that power gave him the chance to chase projects that were completely his own. After Jaws, Spielberg wasted no time. He directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a movie that proved he wasn't just lucky with sharks. After that, he directed Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., and Jurassic Park. Each of those movies carried that same sense of awe and adventure that Spielberg learned to tap into with Jaws. It's not a stretch to say that without the success of the shark movie, we might never have gotten some of the most iconic films of all time. But Spielberg himself often admitted that Jaws wasn't just about success. It taught him lessons he carried into every other movie. On set, he faced endless problems, but instead of quitting, he adapted. He leaned on suspense, building fear by showing less of the shark and letting the audience's imagination do the work. Later in his career, he credited those limitations for shaping his entire style. He learned that sometimes what you can't show is even more powerful than what you can. Of course, the success also came with pressure. Once you make the biggest movie of all time, everyone expects you to keep topping yourself. Spielberg carried that weight for years. Every new project was compared to Jaws. Some saw him as a genius, others as someone who just got lucky. But he kept proving himself again and again, pushing the limits of what movies could be while never losing that sense of wonder. Looking back, it's clear that Jaws was both a blessing and a curse for Spielberg. It made him, but it also set the bar sky high. Yet, if there's one thing history shows, it's that Spielberg rose to the challenge. The shark may have been fake, but the career it launched was very real, and it changed Hollywood forever. Legacy of Jaws. When Jaws hit theaters in 1975, audiences walked out terrified, thrilled, and forever changed. But the legacy of this movie didn't end with a great white shark on the big screen. It went way beyond Hollywood and left an imprint on culture, tourism, and even science. People who had never set foot in the ocean suddenly developed a fear of what might be lurking beneath the waves. Beaches reported drops in attendance, with some families refusing to swim at all. The film's suspenseful score and imagery became so iconic that even dipping a toe in the water could bring the theme music rushing into people's minds. Tourism took a hit in many coastal towns. Lifeguards had to reassure nervous swimmers, while local businesses tried to convince visitors that sharks weren't waiting at every shoreline. At the same time, though, the fascination with sharks exploded. Scientists noticed a spike in public interest, which led to more documentaries, news coverage, and debates about these predators of the sea. Hollywood, of course, wasted no time. The success of Jaws spawned a flood of imitators. Films like Orca, Piranha, and much later, the So Bad It's Good Sharknado series, few ever came close to the suspense Spielberg created. But the idea of man versus nature became a reliable template for decades of monster movies. The obsession didn't stop at fiction, though. Jaws arguably laid the groundwork for the rise of programs like Discovery Channel's Shark Week. While the movie may have painted sharks as mindless killers, later documentaries tried to correct the record by showing their role in the ecosystem. In a strange way, Jaws both harmed and helped the reputation of sharks by creating fear, but also sparking curiosity. Even Steven Spielberg admitted he never saw this cultural tidal wave coming. To him, It was just a thriller about survival and suspense. He didn't predict that a single movie would change how millions of people viewed the ocean, influence tourism, and keep sharks at the center of pop culture conversations. What are your thoughts on Spielberg's revelations about the behind-the-scenes struggles of Jaws? Do you think the movie would still hold its legendary status if everything had gone according to plan? Or was it the chaos that made it timeless? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.